side. So you have something for your eyes and something for your stomach. Dr. Chaudry is co-founder of the Center for Understanding Islam, and it's through this group that he's providing this program for you today, hopefully to enlighten us and give us a fuller understanding of the richness of the Islamic tradition. So we'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Chaudry.
Assalamu alaikum. Let me greet you with the Islamic greeting, which means peace be upon you. As Phyllis said, my goal is to help you understand a little more than you now do about Islam and Muslims. And the format that we have worked out is really based on a course that I teach at Rutgers University and the material that I utilize there. So I would like to divide this into two parts. I know you have a lot of questions, so for that reason, I'd like to give the presentation first on the basics, and then talk about some of the practices, the rituals, so that you have an understanding, and a little bit of background about some of the issues that do arise. And then we will have a short break, which means you can then look at the exhibit. I'm very grateful to Salman and Sister Sharmeen Malik for arranging the exhibit and then the refreshments, and my wife, Victoria, who's here also, making all these arrangements. Without their help, we wouldn't have this nice display that they've set up. Before I begin, though, I need to ask you if it is okay to videotape this session. I do this sometimes to learn myself as to whether I am responding to the questions correctly, and is there something more that I should cover. And therefore, it helps me next time when I have to give a presentation. So I just like to, if there's even a single person who does not like it to be recorded, first of all, the camera's in the back, so it's going to capture me mostly, and then it'll capture the questions. But if anyone doesn't want it to be recorded, we will certainly not do that. Does anybody have an objection to recording it? All right, good. Then we can begin. Okay, here we are. And by the way, I also want to thank Phyllis, who's been extremely patient with my team in getting this function organized and all the things that we wanted to try to do. And Phyllis, as you know, is our program director for all the adult programs. She runs a very successful program called Leisure Learning. And if you haven't taken advantage of it, I highly recommend it. She does a great job of getting good speakers, excellent speakers. So this is the outline that I'd like to begin with in terms of the basics. What do we mean by the spirit of Islam? So you may have read about these things, so if I'm repeating, I'll go through it quickly. My idea is to give you an understanding of the word Islam and Muslim. And usually when I have time, I ask my classes to answer a simple question. I won't do that today because I won't take the time to write it. But I ask them basically, what comes to your mind when you hear the word Muslim or Islam? And I usually get a pretty long list of positive and negative things that come up. And actually I've used that in my lectures to shape the discussion, because that helps me understand what's on their mind, what's concerning them. And then I'll take that and use that to build the lectures. Then I also give them a quotation from the scriptures and ask them to tell me if it comes from the Torah, from the Bible, or from the Gospel, or from the Quran. And I find a very good mix of responses to that also. It turns out that all of those quotations, 8 of them, come from the Quran. But we will have at least half the people say, yes, it came from the Torah, or it came from the Gospels. And then this sort of gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you're going to hear today in terms of the commonalities. And we will talk about not just what Islam is about, but also what's common between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Okay? And then I talk about some of the sources. I guess I have to keep it away. Okay, there you go. Phyllis, is the remote going to work?
Pardon me?
Is the remote going to work on the projector? Let me try that. If you have the remote. Otherwise, we'll
No,
do
this one. I'm going to take it off.
Yeah. So,
I have a remote from our laptop.
okay. Okay, let me check. I haven't read the board yet.
So many gifts.
Okay. Technology sometimes does get in the way, so we'll leave that alone. So let's begin with a basic definition. The word Islam is a very old Arabic word that comes from the root of the word silm, S-I-L-M. And it has two meanings. The first and basic meaning is submission to the will of God, or surrender to the will of God. And the second meaning, from the same root, is peace. So that's why salam, the word salam literally means peace. When I say salamu alaikum or assalamu alaikum, the peace be upon you, that's exactly where it comes from. So that's the source. So peace is built into the name of the faith, just to begin with, as a root. The other thing that I want to mention, I know a lot of people who talk about different pronunciations of the word Muslim. Now, who's a Muslim? A Muslim is someone who believes in Islam or accepts Islam as a faith. So the followers, no matter where in the world they may be, whatever culture they may come from or what language they speak, are called Muslims. And literally, the word simply means a Muslim is someone who is submitted to the will of God. And you can actually trace this back to Prophet Abraham. I'm going to talk more about Prophet Abraham later on. That in the Quran we are told that it was Prophet Abraham who first called people who believed in God, in the one Creator, Muslims. He was the one who said, people who believe, who surrender to the will of God and believe in the Almighty are Muslims. So the word itself, as I said, comes from that origin. And simply emphasizing the significance of the submission. Now the second note that I have, you just need to go up here. You have to do the arrow. Yes, just move the arrow. Okay. Do you want a chair? All right, good. Thank you very much. All right. This time we'll stay on this. Okay. Now you hear in the newscasts, the radio as well, people using the word Muslim. It's not uncommon. And you can't blame people if they haven't paid attention to it. But since the word is Arabic and its pronunciation is Muslim, I would recommend that we follow that and use that, because Muslim indirectly does have a derogatory connotation. Because there is a word in Arabic called zulm, which means ignorance. Or someone who doesn't know the truth, is not aware. And therefore, sometimes when you use that kind of a word, it sort of implies that. And we'd like to avoid that. And some people even spell it with M-O-Z, because they want to pronounce it exactly as it sounds. So I'd like to suggest that if you hear people use that expression, help them understand that Muslim is the correct pronunciation. Now, let me just give you a general idea. Since we're going to now talk about Muslims, I wanted to set this up, and then we'll come back to the discussion later on about American Muslims and what the American Muslims are trying to do. Of the world population, there are about 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. You will find Muslims in any country you go to. Majority countries, obviously, you are familiar with. What's the largest Muslim country in the world? Indonesia is the largest, and then you have probably the second largest Muslim population in India, even though it is by and large a Hindu-dominated society, but because of the size of the population, the next largest population of Muslims is in India. And then of course you have Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Singapore, and all the other countries, including provinces of China that have Muslim populations. The second element that I think you would be interested in is the breakup between Sunni and Shia. I'm going to talk to the difference between Sunni and Shia later, but I just want to give you an idea of the population. In the aggregate, overall, about 15% of the world Muslim population is considered Shia. Now, there are some countries where, of course, Shia are a majority. Can we think of a country that has a majority of Shia?
Iran?
We all know that. Iran would be next, Lebanon, and then so forth. They have sizable populations. Pakistan has a population. But by and large, on average, for the world as a whole, we have about 15% of the population that would be considered Shia. And I will explain the difference between Shia and Sunni, but just so that it doesn't cause anyone to worry too much, Sunni simply means people who follow the way of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Sunnah simply means the way the Prophet lived his life, how he did things, what he said to people, what he asked people to do. That is considered the Sunnah, what the Prophet approved of, what he liked, what he did in his own life, because it has been reported in great detail. So people who follow the Sunnah, follow the way of the Prophet, the way he lived his life, are called Sunnis. Shia is not a religious sect, and that's why I don't like to use the word sect with respect to this, because sectarian has the religious connotation. Shia simply are people who believe that when the Prophet passed away, that Ali, who was his cousin and one of the closest companions, should have been the next leader of the Muslim community. On the other hand, the majority of the people felt and agreed that anyone who has earned the respect of the community through the consensus, through his behavior, through his actions, should be the leader. So there is no hereditary bloodline right to power. Therefore, there were some people who felt no, because he was a cousin of the Prophet, he came from the bloodline, that Ali should be the next leader of the community, and we had a political battle. There's a long history to that. I won't get into that right now. So it's a political difference, not a religious difference. To give you a more current perspective, Pew study that was done, just issued in May 22nd, 2007, that looked at the population of U.S. Muslims and gave a little more of the ethnic makeup. So you have an idea of the Muslim population. And here in percentages, we're looking at how, compared to the total U.S. population on the left-hand column, those who are born in the United States and those who are born overseas, and compared with the general public. And you can see that 44% of the white Muslims will be born foreign, 10% black, 28% Asian, and 18% will be other groups. Now, Hispanic is a separate category because, as you know, Hispanics will come from many different backgrounds, and therefore one grouping is created separately for that. So you can see the makeup of the population currently as we have it in the United States. Let's go there. Now this may be hard for you to read, but I want to share this with you. And by the way, anyone who is interested in details, I'll be happy to email a copy of this. I didn't want to make too many copies and to save some trees, but if anyone is interested in pursuing these in detail and would like to have it, I'll be happy to email it to you. Leave us your email. We'll do that. This is a chart right out of the Pew Survey. And this is also by way of background, so that we are not talking about American Muslims versus European populations of Muslims, so immigrants or first or second generation Muslims who are there. And the point of this chart really is to show the contrast between how the American Muslims are much more integrated and mainstream. That was the headline of the survey when Pew Service issued its survey. And it shows the differences between how the Muslim population in the United States has higher levels of income, much more alike with the rest of the society. People are not living in ghettos. You don't have concentrated groups or population centers. As you have in England, for example, you go to Birmingham or Liverpool or parts of London where I spent 40 years at the London School of Economics and know fairly well what South Hall looked like in different parts of London where there was concentration of populations. And also, big difference that they point out is the level of education. People who came to the United States, by and large, came for higher education, for professional reasons, in the 60s and 70s. Now, in the late 80s and 90s, we did have some populations in the blue-collar professions also, especially in the big cities. You see the presence of taxi drivers. And I don't mean to be demeaning anyone, but there is a difference in terms of the level of education and how they might interact. Because I'm going to make a point later on about how that integration actually came about. Let's go to the next one. So here we see the diversity among Muslims in general. This is from another study, because frequently people assume that all Muslims are Arabs, or all Arabs are Muslims. Neither one is true. As you can see from the data, and I think we have now probably become more familiar with that, with the conflict in Iraq, there's more news, there's more coverage, you're seeing more, you're hearing more from different people, reporters are writing stories, so perhaps there is a better understanding. But I'm sure that if I spoke to somebody 5 years ago, the majority of the people would not understand that distinction. So 18% of the Muslims live in the Arab world, 20% in the Sub-Saharan Africa, 30% South Asian, which is now Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and that area. The single largest country, as we said, is Indonesia, and then of course you have sizable populations in Central Asia as well. We know of Uzbekistan and other areas that are there. Okay, let's go to the basic beliefs. Now, let me begin first with an outline of the belief system, and then I will talk specifically about some of the pillars, the practices that we follow. First and foremost is the belief in the one Creator, the Almighty, who has many, many attributes, as we read in the Bible as well as in the Quran. He was all omnipresent. He knows. He can do. He has all power to create and do things. So it is the supremacy of God's will is what Muslims recognize as the basic tenet of faith. The oneness of God. Call it Tawheed is the word in Arabic. Oneness is absolutely essential and central to our faith system. Second, we believe in all the prophets of God. Because we believe, the Quran tells us that Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet, as we believe, but Prophet Jesus, Prophet Moses, Abraham, peace be upon all of them, was sent by God, and many others at different times to different communities. People who spoke the language, in fact, the Quran speaks to the fact that we sent messengers in the language of the people that they spoke so they could communicate with them. All right? Because we felt that God sent these messengers at different times. However, I'd like to emphasize, and I will probably return to that theme, that the message that each of these prophets delivered to their respective communities was the same. So we believe in the revelation, the essence of the message that came through different prophets was the same. And that sort of explains the similarity of the languages, the language in the various scriptures. Next, we believe in the day of judgment. Accountability for our actions is very, very important. So we believe that there is going to be accountability for what we do on this earth. And how that happens, when it's going to come, only God knows. We believe in the angels, that God has created angels who have different functions. Who is the most well-known angel? Gabriel. Gabriel is the one, we believe, we are told, who brought the messages, the revelations from God to Prophet Muhammad, as he did to other prophets. So we believe that God has angels that he has created. Finally, we also believe in all the books of God. There are several books. There are three major revelations that are recognized in the Quran, and therefore we talk about the people of the book. I'm sure you've heard that expression. And the people of the book, and remember the Quran says the book, not the books. The book meaning the message. In other words, the same message that God gave, it came in different languages, it came to different messengers, but it is the book of God. Okay? And so therefore we believe the gospel, the Torah, are the sacred books that are revealed to the respective prophets, just as the Quran is. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. So again, to summarize, belief in God, belief in the day of judgment, belief in all the prophets that God sent, belief in the angels, and of course, all the books that God has revealed to us. Now let's talk about the Holy Quran. And I did bring a few copies of the Holy Quran in the back, and if anybody wishes to look at it. And before we started, someone was asking about what translation of the Quran do you recommend, and I will address that, and I brought two examples of that here as well, so you can take a look at that. But let's talk about the general framework of sources of guidance to Muslims. What do we base our faith on? What do we base our practices on? What do we follow? First and foremost is the Holy Quran, which we believe to be the revealed Word of God through angel Gabriel to Prophet Muhammad. The second are the collections of sayings that have been narrated by people who heard the Prophet say things, or give directions, or did things in his life that they have been recorded. And these are known as hadith, is the one word, and plural would be ahadith, which is a collection of these sayings. And these are the second most important source of guidance. The third, what we call ijtihad, that is the interpretation by scholars of both the Quran and the Hadith. And of course the life of the Prophet himself, as to how he did things, how he responded to issues that people raised during his life. So these are three sources now. The Holy Quran, the sayings of the Prophet, the life, the example of his life, and finally the interpretations provided by the scholars. And this is all the more important today, because we now need to understand how does it apply to us today in different conditions where people are living. But as I said, the Holy Quran is a real Word of God. It has 114 chapters. There are chapters that will only be 3 verses long, and the longest chapter is 284. It varies, and the subjects that are covered in the Quran are too numerous for me to mention, but I will mention a few of them. And one of them is the fact that there is a whole chapter devoted to Mary, mother of Jesus. There's a chapter called Maryam, or Mary, that is directly addressing stories that you have read in the Bible. And you will find much similarity in the language of the Quran about that. And for that reason, the fact that there's a whole chapter devoted to Mary, there is a great deal of reverence for the mother of Jesus, as it is for Jesus himself, as a prophet of God. So it places a very special emphasis on recognizing that position. The first chapter of the Quran, I just took a slide of the Arabic version of the first chapter. This is the opening. It's called Fatiha. And I'm going to give you a translation in a moment. It's decorated, generally, because that's how most of the people like to have their books, the simple ones also. But just like you have decorated Bibles and Torahs, I'm sure, these are generally printed with beautiful margins and so forth. And different calligraphy is used even in the script that you see there. Let's go to the next one. I think that should be the translation. Now, before I give you the translation, let me recite for you, what it sounds like in Arabic. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Begin in the name of God, most merciful, most beneficent. Praise to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the worlds, most gracious, most merciful, master of the day of judgment. Thee do we worship, and thine aid we seek. Show us the straight way, the way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, those whose portion is not wrath, and who go not astray. This chapter of the Holy Quran is used in our daily prayers for every single unit of prayer that we offer. So this is a prayer that's being said when we stand up before God. And many Christians have recognized this as the Lord's Prayer. Sounds very much like what the wording would be in the Lord's Prayer, the essence of what that is. And the reason for that is that, as I said, the messages were the same. And we are talking about the same Creator, the same God that everyone refers to. And if you go back to the other scriptures, we see that Muslims believe in the Quran in its original Arabic to be the little word of God, as it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, just like the other final revelations, other revelations that were revealed to different prophets, Prophet Abraham, the scrolls, the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, and so forth. You see the Arabic words, Injil, and others that are used for the equivalent of the English. And these are directly recognized as the sacred books of the people of the book in the Quran. Now, hadiths, as I said earlier, are a collection of the sayings of the Prophet, as has been narrated by people. And I will comment on the authenticity of what has been reported in a moment. But essentially, what we need to understand is that hadith plays an extremely important role in the interpretation of the Quran itself. Because after all, when we talk about the message of the Creator, when it was delivered to us in Arabic, and has been recorded as such. And it has been kept that way. And it is our firm belief that there has been no change from the original revelations that were received by the Prophet, peace be upon him, and recorded. So that anywhere in the world you go, you pick up a copy of the Quran, the Arabic will be the same. There will be different translations, but the Arabic itself, the text, will be exactly the same. So therefore we needed to understand, how did the Prophet interpret that revelation? When it came to him, how did he act according to the revelations? How did he respond to questions? And what were the circumstances when those revelations came? And how did he explain it? So it's very, very important for us to understand all of the sayings that the Prophet had said. Now, let me go to the next one. There is a whole science of hadith, a little called the science of hadith. There are courses taught at many universities in the Muslim world about how the narrations, the stories that people told about what they had heard were authenticated. And it meant that you had to understand what they were saying, but secondly, you had to know who was saying it. So to authenticate the veracity of the hadith, you had to know that what they were saying was consistent with what other people had reported. This is a one simple test, it's much more complicated than that. But secondly, that the person who's reporting it, how close was he to the Prophet? How long is the chain of narration? Did he hear it from the 10th person, or did he hear it first hand? Did he hear it second hand, third hand, and so forth? Right? And finally, what about the personality, the character of the person who's reporting? The integrity of the individual. Is he a believable person? Is he normally known to be truthful? Because if there's any question about his character, about his background, about his reputation, then it will be discounted. So based on that, the scholars have come up with these 5 categories. So the first one is called Sahih. And there are 2 major volumes that are published. One is Sahih Bukhari and the other one is Sahih Muslim, that are considered to be most authentic. So when someone cites a hadith in support of a position or in explanation of the Quran, they will identify where it came from, what was the source. And the second one is Hasan, which is sound but not as strong as the most authentic Sahih. Then the weak, very weak, and the fabricated ones. Now there are stories in it that people, the scientists who have looked at it, the scholars who have looked at it, have determined that they would not be supported. I just recently received a 14-page paper in Arabic that we try to get translated, and some friends of mine helped to try to understand what that was, about issues that were raised in the Quran. And one of the points that this particular scholar made after a lot of research for many years was to show that this particular hadith on which a ruling was based, and I won't go into the subject because it's too long by itself, that the narrator himself was 2 years old when he reports to have heard it from someone. He was 2 years old when he claimed to have heard it from someone else. So that's the kind of research people go into to find out the veracity of the individual who's reporting it. Okay? So that's what we mean by hadith. So typically when you hear about the Quran and hadith, we are really talking about the top 1 or 2 categories where you're looking at what the Prophet said and it has been authenticated. The third source, as I had mentioned, was the Ijtihad. That is the scholarly work that has been done by scholars for hundreds of years, for the last 1,428 years. It is something that I refer to this as the intellectual jihad. We're going to talk about jihad a little later on. But intellectual jihad to us is, in fact, the key to understanding the teachings of the Quran, the revealed Word of God, and the example of the Prophet, and what the Prophet said. Without the help of the scholars, who have devoted years and years of research and have mastered all of the original sources, we would be lost in trying to interpret what's being said. So this is the kind of work that went on for centuries. Now, I must say that this work is actually now into a huge revival, especially in the West, and in particular in North America, where scholars are now devoting a lot of resources and a lot of effort to doing that. For the last 500 to 600 years, we have not done enough of that. It was somewhat dormant, but there's a lot more attention being paid now to what does it really mean. And there are some beautiful books and new literature that has come out that will help us do that. Now, let me just give you another overview quickly about some of our holidays. You have heard about the Ramadan, which is the month of fasting. The end of the month of Ramadan is celebrated by what we call Eid al-Fitr, and it's a feast that is celebrated essentially the end of the Ramadan, which means we actually thank God, thank our Creator for having given us the opportunity to observe one of our biggest responsibilities. And having gone through the month of Ramadan fasting and actually experiencing the closer spiritual connection to God, and also recognizing what it means to be hungry, recognizing the condition of those people who don't have a choice. We decide not to. We stay hungry by choice. But there are lots of people in the world who do not have a choice, who don't have a single meal in a day. So we begin to recognize what that means, and we are then told to give charity during that month. The second important holiday is Eid al-Adha, which is the Feast of the Sacrifice, and this goes directly to the tradition of Prophet Abraham. And my wife and I will be leaving Thursday for Hajj for the first time in our life. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and we in fact will be going through the steps that Prophet Abraham and Hagar went through hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago actually, and the Prophet went through 1428 years ago. So this is celebrated to commemorate the event that Prophet Abraham, when he was being tested by God, his faith was being tested, when God asked him to sacrifice his firstborn, and he was prepared to do so. And of course, God recognized that, and we believe God then sent a lamb in his place, and that's why we have this tradition of sacrificing a lamb, and then distributing the meat, dividing the meat into 3 parts. The family can only eat 1/3 for its own consumption. 1/3 must go to the poor, and the other 1/3 can go to the relatives. So there again, sharing, recognizing first of all the test of faith, that we are always being tested in different situations. And remembering Prophet Abraham's example, that he had full trust in God in doing what he was prepared to do, and therefore when we do this, we are essentially remembering that. The other key holidays that I'd like to mention are first, the Night of Power. This comes during the month of Ramadan. It is one of the odd nights, the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. Sometimes we frequently celebrate it on the 27th, and this is the day, or the night actually, where the Quran actually refers to the fact that God says that this is the night that we actually sent the Quran. That we actually began to reveal the Quran on that night. And therefore it's known as a very special night, and therefore Night of Power, because if you pray during this night, you get many-fold blessings for doing that and getting closer to God. Another holiday that is celebrated, not universally by everyone, is the birthday of the Prophet. Birthday of the Prophet is generally celebrated in mosque by speeches about his life, how to learn from his example, what he taught, and then so forth, rather than a big party. So that is usually the way it is celebrated. Now there are some people, some very, who have a very rigid view that no one's birthday should be celebrated lest people begin to think of that person as worthy of worship. They're so strict that you should not have any celebration, certainly of the Prophet in that case. So, as I said, the majority of the Muslims do recognize it and acknowledge that. The third important holiday, which is very, very significant to all Muslims, but especially significant to Shia. And remember I mentioned the political rift that occurred. And Ashura is the 10th day of the month of Muharram, when the grandson of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was killed in a place called Karbala in Iraq, out of that political struggle that was taking place. And he was trying to fight tyranny, and as I said, during that battle he was killed, and the Shia then had a very important tradition of commemorating that loss. Now, Sunnis do also have events at the mosque during those days on the 10th. We recognize that as a holiday. But Shia would actually take out a procession. It's much more visible, and actually they feel that they should experience the suffering that the grandson of the Prophet did to share in that grief. And that's part of the rituals that they follow. Let me mention some of the specific customs. You're probably familiar with the first line. Alcohol is forbidden, pork is forbidden, blood, dead animals, and so forth. Food should be prepared in the food manner called halal, which is the same essentially as kosher food. The point is that any food that you eat should have been prepared with the name of God being invoked. So when the animal is slaughtered for food, that name of God should be invoked. And when that's done, the food is prepared, and it's also necessary because we are not allowed to eat blood, so the blood must be drained before you actually finish the preparation of the food. So that's one of the requirements. Some of the customs, hijab is one of them, and I know it's come up. I'm going to leave it to questions. All right, I don't need to go into that. Also, customs of shaking of hands. Some Muslim women may not shake your hand. Okay, majority will. But that again is a matter of customs rather than religion. Now, if I may, I talk to commonality. First and foremost, we recognize, and I'm talking about the monotheistic faiths here. I know there are many other faiths beyond Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but among the monotheistic faiths, these are the commonalities that I think we should be recognizing. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the most recent developments with respect to the closeness between Christians and Muslims and Jews, but especially now, as you know, on October 12th, 138 Muslim scholars and leaders sent a message to the Pope and to many other leaders in the Christian world. The Pope had just sent a response, a very positive response, welcoming the opportunity and recognizing the courage of the Muslim leaders to initiate that invitation, which was known as the common word between us and you. You may have heard about that. And the Pope has now actually invited Muslim leaders to meet with him, to begin the process, and encouraging the churches all over to try to encourage dialogue. The Divinity School at Yale also published a full-time ad in the New York Times, responding to that, responding to the common word, saying that we appreciate it, we welcome it, and that it is important for us to continue to talk. Yes?
Ali, did the Pope extend the invitation also to other Christian religious leaders like the Archbishop of Canterbury and some of the Greek patriarchs and so forth? Or there's just going to be a conversation between the Pope and his people and representatives of the 138 scholars?
At this point, I believe the Pope is inviting us to come to him at the Vatican. So that is a meeting that he's hosting. I think what we're trying to do, and what for the original message was, it was sent to the Archbishop of Canterbury, it was sent to all the leaders all over the world. And so therefore the idea is to get the, if you get the post blessing, which is a very large number of Catholics in the world, it gets us started on the right foot and working with the other communities. Just Friday, the former Archbishop McCarrick, who was the Archbishop of Washington, he's now retired, hosted an event at the National Press Club. And I just happened to tune into C-SPAN and watched it, and then I've since downloaded the whole speech. And there you had a Muslim scholar who was the head of the Fiqh Council, and I'm going to mention that a little later on. It's a council of Muslim leaders, scholars in North America, who have issued a fatwa against terrorism, and fatwa toward the need for cooperation and interfaith work that needs to be done. As I said, it's available through C-SPAN, and I just downloaded it today before I came here because I wanted to get a record of that. So that those things are important, and the reason I mentioned the commonality is that that's what the interfaith discussion is going to be all about, and that we need to work, very closely with all faith groups to understand what is common. And I think as we begin to understand each other's faiths, we hopefully can dispel some of the misperceptions that exist. And I will mention that we may share many prophets. We, of course, have a common interest in Jerusalem, shared universal values, and shared emphasis on justice. And let me first talk about the ritualistic sharing. Now, I mentioned that Islam, of course, emphasizes prayer, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage. These are the pillars, in addition to the declaration of faith. These are the four plus the first pillar, which is the declaration of faith. But these are practiced in the other monotheistic faiths in one form or another. For example, prayer is common. Perhaps, we prostrate, you kneel. And there are different ways of doing that. I've attended Shabbat services at B'nai Or in Morristown Friday evening, and I recognize how that service is performed, how the Torah is brought out and then paraded, and how people revere and what services mean to them. So Muslims perform services differently, but the idea is that we are praying to the same God. Fasting. The Quran tells us that fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for people before you, because it was prescribed for Christians and Jews, and there are practices that still exist. Charity, of course, is common among all three faiths, and in fact, the word in Arabic, sadaqah, is the same as the word in the Jewish tradition. Sadaqah meaning charity, and there's a great deal of emphasis of giving charity, giving out of what you have been given. And of course, the pilgrimage. Now, of course, the Muslim pilgrimage is very formal. It is once in a lifetime. We are expected to visit the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, and perform the rituals that we believe Prophet Abraham went through, and then Prophet Muhammad went through. But there are different pilgrimages performed by Christians and Jews. In one of my classes, someone questioned the idea of a pilgrimage in Judaism, but then others in the same class said, "Oh, but when we say next year in Jerusalem, what does that mean?" In other words, there's a praise to Jerusalem, and going to Jerusalem is sort of considered a strengthening of your faith and getting closer to God through that practice. Okay, let's talk about the differences. And some of these may become subject of questions later on, but I wanted to cover these. Status of Jesus is clearly one of the differences that we all recognize. Muslims treat Jesus as a prophet of God, a very special prophet of God. And therefore, there's a great deal of discussion in the Quran and about Mary, Mother of Jesus. Another difference we have is the concept of original sin. There is no original sin in Islam. We believe that everyone is born innocent in the image of God, and that we learn what's right and wrong from our scriptures, and we learn behaviors afterwards. based on our upbringing. So there is no concept of original sin. We clearly, in some instances, when you have any issue with Trinity versus one God, I know some people, so many of people in my audiences have said, when I say that we worship the same God as Christians and Jews do, one of the priests told me, that doesn't do it for me. And I said, well, that's my faith, that's what I believe in firmly, and if you conceive of God in a different way, then that's between you and God. Okay, so there is that, if there is a difference, then that difference does exist. We need to recognize that and respect that. The concept of jihad, and I'm going to say a few more words later on about jihad, the three different meanings of jihad, and the idea of just war. So let me leave that for now. The places of worship, when we go to a mosque, a synagogue, or a church, we have some differences. In a mosque, you would not find any statues or pictures of animate objects. Certainly in the area where you're praying. Okay, there will be no pictures, no statues. That is similar to the synagogue. Synagogue doesn't have statues or pictures either. It has beautiful geometric designs, just like you see the calligraphy in the back that we would have on display, but no pictures. And the reason for that is, for Muslims, is that you shouldn't even think about anyone else, any other being, when you're praying. When you're standing before God, your full concentration must be on God, and there should be no other distraction to possibly, distract you. And of course, we have some dietary preferences. Now, I'd like to come back to one of the basic commonalities, Prophet Abraham. We all share him as the patriarch of our faith. And I chose these selections where we see in James 2:23, and the scripture was fulfilled which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. In Chronicles, did you not, O our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel, and give it to the descendants of Abraham, your friend, forever. Isaiah, but thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. The Quran, who can be better in religion than one who submits his whole self to Allah, does good, and follows the way of Abraham, the true faith? For Allah did take Abraham for a friend. So all scriptures refer to Abraham in the central position as a closeness to God, the friend of God. And the Quran, the word for Abraham in the Quran is Khalilur Rahman, friend of God. But similarly, there is a similar expression for Jesus and for Moses. For Jesus, the Quran refers to him as Ruhullah, the Spirit of God. It refers to Moses as Kalimullah, someone who spoke with God, who had a conversation with God. So when we refer to these prophets, and we always try to say peace be upon all of them, because that we are, as far as I'm concerned, for me to be a Muslim, I must believe in Jesus, in Moses, in Abraham, and all the prophets that God mentions as prophets of God, as legitimate messengers that God sent. And the message that he sent is consistent with it. In the Quran we say the same religion has established, and he established for you as what he had enjoined on Noah, the which he had sent by inspiration to thee, and that which he enjoined on Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, namely, that you should remain steadfast in religion, and make no divisions therein. To those who worship other things than Allah, hard is the way to which you call them. Allah chooses to himself those whom he pleases, and guides to himself those who turn to him. And in fact, in the Quran, God says, come to me. If you walk towards me, I'll run towards you. Literally, that's what the Quran says. You take one step, I will run towards you. And the Quran also says that we are closer to you than your jugular vein. So the closer, that is recognizing God, that we are closer to you than your jugular vein. Your being. Okay? So that's what closeness to God means. And so when we seek God's love, we sees God's blessings, that's what we're talking about. Status of Mary, mother of Jesus. And by the way, the Quran always referred to Mary as mother of Jesus. Every time there's a reference, it will say mother of Jesus. And I mentioned to you that there's a whole chapter that talks about the virgin birth. Now, people ask me, how is that possible? And we say, well, if God could have created Adam from nothing, then he's capable of creating Jesus without a father, without a human father. Okay? And therefore, we believe in that that notion of the virgin birth, as the Quran explains it to us. As I said, the reference for Maryam and Jesus in the Quran is quite widespread, and you will see that Mary is also viewed as a model for Muslim women for modesty, in terms of the mother as the mother of Jesus, of what she represented, and is highly regarded in that regard. Now let's talk about a little more about Jesus, because I know these are issues that might come up in questions. So Quran says, behold, the angel said, O Mary, Allah giveth thee glad tidings of a word from him. His name will be Jesus, Christ Jesus, the Son of Mary, held in honor in this world and in the hereafter, and of the company of those nearest to Allah. And by the way, every time I say Allah, because that's in the translation, read God if you're more comfortable with that, because that's exactly what we mean. The Arabic word happens to be Allah, which is commonly used in all of the texts. And then the Quran says, and in their footsteps we sent Jesus, the Son of Mary, confirming the law that had come before him. We sent him the gospel. Therein was guidance and light, and confirmation of the law that had come before him, a guidance and admonition of those who fear Allah. Now, I want to correct this in terms of fear. We use the word fear sometimes in these translations, because that is how the wording was used in the Bible. So people who were translating followed the English language pretty much. The word in Arabic that is in this verse is taqwa. And taqwa really means consciousness of God, being aware of God, being aware of what God wants us to do, what his will is. So taqwa really is translated as awareness and, as I said, cognizance of God. And in one of the translations that I have in the back is very consistent in utilizing that. There are other common commandments that we will find, that we ordained laws for him in the tablets, in all that matters, both commanding and explaining things, and said, take and hold with these. This is for those who are asking. This is for those who will ponder, constantly reminding us that you need to use your intellect that God has given you to think about issues that are before you. About life, I know that these questions come up with respect to the sacredness of life. The Quran says, because of this did we ordain unto the children of Israel that if anyone slays a human being, unless it be in punishment for murder or for spreading corruption on the earth, it shall be as though he had slain all mankind. This is also the same wording in the Torah. Whereas, if anyone saves a life, it shall be as though he had saved the lives of all mankind. And indeed, there came unto our apostles, there came unto them our apostles with all evidence of the truth. Yet, behold, notwithstanding all this, many of them go on committing all manners of excesses on earth. So this is again a reminder that God did send messengers when people when he felt that people were going astray. Now the next chart is very, very busy. I won't try to read through that. It's in the white booklet that's in the back if you're interested in reading it. But I do want to sum this up. With respect to the teachings or the values that Islam embraces and teaches its followers are the respect for life, respect for property, self-determination, human dignity, respect for knowledge, and all of these form what I believe truly the universal values that all faiths teach. That all money is the service terms of sacredness of life and respecting others. And in fact, one of the messages that was conveyed in this letter that went to the Pope, and his response was love of God, love of your neighbor. Those are the two themes that were emphasized, that are common, and we need to continue to remind ourselves that that's what really is what God wants us to follow. So let me summarize the major differences then. There's really basically three. View of Jesus as the prophet of God versus those who might think of him in a different sense. No concept of original sin, and of course, salvation through deeds. And Muslims believe that salvation comes through your good works. And in fact, in the Quran, there is a very direct statement that says that those who believe in God, those who believe in the scriptures, it refers to the Jewish scriptures, the Christian scriptures, and the Quran. Those who believe in the scriptures, right? Those who believe in God, believe in the day of judgment, and do good deeds, and nothing to fear on the day of judgment. And they will have their reward with their Lord. And that's repeated in many different words in the Quran. So the criteria for salvation are believing in the Creator, doing His will, doing what He wants us to do, right? Recognizing that our actions are going to be accounted for, and finally, doing good deeds. When we grew up as children, we went to school, we were taught that you have two angels traveling with you all the time. One on your right shoulder, and one on your left shoulder. The one on your right shoulder writes down all the good things that you do, and one on the left shoulder writes down all the bad things that you do. And there will be a balance sheet at the end on the day of judgment that you have to account for. Yeah. Okay. So that so you're always aware. The notion is that we need to be conscious of what's right and wrong, what the Creator has told us was right and wrong, what we need to do in our life. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here because the next topic is contemplation of terrorism and dealing with current topics. So, would you like to take a 2-minute break, stretch, and maybe if you want to get a drink, why don't we take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and we'll finish the rest of it and then we'll have questions.
I don't know where I stand the first time.
And in fact, it is a question that every audience that I've addressed asks. And that is, how come we haven't heard Muslim leaders condemn terrorism? That was the topic that I wanted to come to. But before I go into that, a friend reminded me that I should mention another important holiday in Islam, and that is Isra and Mi'raj. And that holiday is associated with the fact that we believe that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, traveled during the night on God's will, from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem to the heavens, and then returned during the same night. And there are a lot of theological concepts associated with that, including the prayer, as to how we got the 5 daily prayers. And the story is that when the prophet traveled during that night through different heavens, he met all the prophets. He met them in Jerusalem and he prayed with them. And then he met them at different levels. And he meets Jesus, he meets Moses, Abraham, and all the others. And there's a story about Moses and Prophet Muhammad about the prayer. When Prophet Muhammad was coming back from having conversation with God, Moses asks him, how many prayers did God prescribe for your people? And the prophet said, 50 a day. And Moses says to him, there's no way. My people were prescribed to offer prayer, that they never did it. You must go back and get that reduced. So he goes back, and he comes back with 30. And Moses said, no way. You're not going to be able to do that. You have to go back again. So make several trips Finally comes back with 5. And Moses still says you should ask for less, but he says, no, I have to accept that. So that's how we have the 5 daily prayers. And the Quran, by the way, does talk about when you should pray. Before the sun rises, middle of the day, then mid-afternoon, one after sunset, and then one before going to bed. These are 5 daily prayers that the Quran actually mentions. But it doesn't mention how you should perform those prayers. Nothing about it at all. Whereas the Hajj, the pilgrimage, is described in detail. Because it says what Abraham and Hagar went through and what you must do, what you must follow. And then, of course, we have the example of the Prophet himself, how he performed the Hajj. So we are these days reading up on all of those details on what steps we have to go through. But with prayer, there's no description in the Quran. And that was based on how the Prophet performed the prayers. He showed his followers how to perform the prayer. So all the rituals that we go through now are based on his practice. And that's the Sunnah. Okay? I'll get back. Okay, let me continue the discussion. There are, coming back to the question of terrorism, the counterterrorism. First of all, right after 9/11, all major organizations in the United States and abroad, anybody who was involved with any major organization issued condemnation unequivocally of 9/11 and of terrorism in general. And on the website of the Center for Understanding Islam, there is a logo that looks like this. You first come to the home page. If you can get it up live, I'll show it to you. Condemnation of terrorism, you will see a complete list and most current list of all the organizations and links to the actual statements that they make. Now, one of the most prestigious organizations and the institution in the Islamic world, which is not quite the Vatican, because we don't have a hierarchy, we do not have a head of religion, a head of the faith, but we have a university called Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, which is the premier institution where people go for training. The head of that mosque, their university, issued a statement 2 days, within a day when it happened. And that's on the record. So all of these statements have been issued, but somehow we have not been able to get it out to the general public, so people still think that nobody has condemned. So we've made a major effort now trying to do this. And in fact, this event on Friday, this Friday, 2 days ago, was probably the first time that a Muslim leader, Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, who is the head of the Fiqh Council of North America, which is a collection of all the leaders, Muslim leaders, scholars in North America, who come together on all religious issues. And they decide, what the right answer is to different questions that people may have. He was with Cardinal McCarrick and with several rabbis and read the fatwa that the council had issued about condemning terrorism and inviting dialogue. And that, I think, was the first time that has actually you've had that kind of an audience where this was a net press club, and I think that's the kind of exposure that's needed. In addition, there is another recent initiative that a Council on American Islamic Relations has taken. They have prepared a kit for the media. Anyone in the media can get a free copy of this kit of trying to understand Islam. They put together a lot of material and then links to various websites that are free. So they're offering it to every media outlet who wishes to write about Islam or certainly wants to understand Islam, so when they write a story, they can respond to questions correctly. So that's another successful step. But we still have a lot of work to do in terms of getting the word out. And when I talked to my classes at Rutgers, that was one of their major concerns. So I asked them, I gave them a questionnaire one day. I said, okay, if you, living in Basking Ridge or New Providence or Berkeley Heights or wherever you are, you as an individual, how would you become aware of a condemnation issued by someone? And how would you actually take that as a statement coming from someone in authority? Who would you consider to be authoritative? So I asked them to give me some feedback. And I got several comments back from people. The gist of that was that the best way and the only way that it will really register with people is if you organize a major street demonstration. That's the only way. Even though I'll show you that all of these condemnations that have been issued by different organizations, and you can see some of the scholars listed here. Can we go back one page? One more. No? Okay. All right, that's okay. Go forward. All right. So you see the major organizations in the United States who have issued these statements. So they said the only way to register really is that if you have a demonstration and then the press will cover it. And so maybe that is what we need to do. That's one of the things. We're going to try to find ways to do that. But we need public national forums where statements like that can be issued and aired. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, let's stick to the petition. Yeah. One of the things that I would like to read to you, and this has been around now for at least 2 years. This is the petition that is on the website of CARE. CARE, by the way, is a civil rights type of organization that does a lot of work in informing the public about what's important. And I would like to read this to you, because this really is the essence of the condemnation that people have been issuing in different words and all over the place, but somehow it hasn't really been heard. It says, we, the undersigned Muslims, and by the way, over 1 million people have signed so far, all around the world who actually signed, went to the website and actually have signed this petition. As we, the undersigned Muslims, wish to state clearly that those who commit acts of terror, murder, and cruelty in the name of Islam are not only destroying innocent lives, but are also betraying the values of faith they claim to represent. No injustice done to Muslims can ever justify the massacre of innocent people. No injustice done to Muslims can ever justify massacre of innocent people. And no act of terror will ever serve the cause of Islam. We repudiate and dissociate ourselves from any Muslim group or individual who commits such brutal and un-Islamic acts. We refuse to allow our faith to be held hostage by the criminal actions of a tiny minority acting outside the teachings of both the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. As it states in the Quran, O you who believe, stand up firmly for justice, as witnesses to God, even if it be against yourselves, or your parents, or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for God can best protect both. Do not follow any passion, lest you not be just. And if you distort or decline to do justice, verily God is well acquainted with all that you do. That is the clearest statement of what the Islamic position is about Islam, about terrorism, and this is what people have been repeating over and over again, but I think, as I said, it just hasn't been heard. So let me talk about jihad. This is the most popular topic. Jihad, I would like to share with you 3 meanings. The essential meaning of jihad, what is called jihad al-akbar, or the greatest jihad, is a struggle, a self-struggle, or striving to understand the will of God and follow that. That is striving against our human urges and follow the will of God. Follow what's right and forbidding and stopping from evil from occurring. And I'll go into this a little more. The lesser jihad, jihad al-saghir, is when you are permitted to take up arms. Right? This is where you can engage in defensive action, but never offensive. Okay? And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then finally, the intellectual jihad that I mentioned earlier. That is with our intellect, with our understanding, all of the ability to understand the Word of God and following the right way, the straight way, as we ask God to show us the straight way, the right way. And the God reminds us constantly, the Quran says, we've shown you the right path and the wrong path, and we've shown you the consequences. And you know how the Quran tells us about consequences? It tells stories about other people, about followers of other prophets who came, who made certain errors, and God says, this is what happens if you don't follow it. So that's how we learn as to what it means to follow that. So continuous understanding and expanding our understanding of that is what we really need to do. Let's go to the Quran, the criterion. Hence do not defer the likes and dislikes of those who deny the truth, but strive hard against them. They talk about jihad. This is the part of the intellectual jihad. Strive against them by means of this divine writ with utmost striving. This doesn't say that if you disagree with people, that you go and kill them. You argue, you discuss, you present. This is what it says. The Quran is the divine writ that has been issued, through and you get read through the Prophet. So this is what you should use. And by the way, Muhammad Asad translation is one of the books that I have in the back. That is in 5 different volumes. Muhammad Asad translation is probably the best for non-Muslims. The second best translation is Yusuf Ali, which we also have copies of, the green cover book. And that is also a very popular translation, very widely distributed. And Yusuf Ali was a member of the Indian Civil Service for many years. His father was very religious, so he gave him religious education also. So he gave up a very prestigious job and then devoted the rest of his life to translating the Quran. And he spent that in London. And so he first published the translation in 1934. And there were several editions after that. The Muhammad Asad translation, Muhammad Asad was a Jew from Austria, went as a journalist to the Middle East, lived there, and began to then understand and follow and became Muslim. And then he wrote. He spent a great deal of time actually with the Saudi family in Saudi Arabia. So he understood. And he writes in the language that I believe is much more accessible and is true to the spirit of the Arabic that we read. And therefore, I highly recommend that. It is not as widely available. It's a little more expensive. But anyone who wishes to get a copy of it, it is free to non-Muslims from what's the name of the foundation? Okay. There are other websites available also, and I'll give them to you, anyone who's interested, that anyone who wants to get it. But if you go to the CARE website, there's a link for anyone who can request a copy, and they will send a copy to you free. Anyone who's interested in reading it. And the beauty of these translations is that they not only have the English translation along with the Arabic, they also have footnotes. So they explain the context. So reading the translation in a paperback that you normally get in the store is not as helpful because you really don't fully understand what the context was. So if you can, get hold of these translations and use those. So if the concept of jihad is to really strive and understand why do we see the violence, and I think this is one of the difficult questions that we have to deal with. So let me talk about, first of all, in simple terms, in a very summary fashion, that by definition, Islam is a religion of peace, but if some Muslims commit acts of terror, those are the criminals who are acting those actions, committing those actions. That is not the faith. And frankly, one of the hardest challenges we have had is to convince people that we need to make a distinction between what the faith teaches, recognize that, and understand that there are bad people, there are people who will commit evil acts, and they exist in every faith. And therefore, we should not be talking about jihad simply as an Islamic, or in the negative sense, in the holy war sense. All right? So when Rudy Giuliani, or John McCain, or Thompson, or even Tancredo talk about Islamic terrorism, they are making that mistake. We have no problem talking about Muslims who committed acts of terror. Bring them to justice. Okay? We should prevent, do whatever we can to prevent that from happening. But please don't, defame and don't, demonize the faith itself. That's the important thing. The other part is that people need to understand that even the practices, pure Islamic practices, vary by culture. There are a lot of things that are done by different Muslims living in different cultures that vary from the original teachings. But those are simply cultural, they're not religious concepts. So that's the second distinction I'd like to emphasize. That try to understand when you see something happening in Saudi Arabia, for example, we've been reading about that. And we now read about Sudan, that absolutely absurd act of jailing this person for allowing her students to put the name of Muhammad on a toy. It makes absolutely no sense. That is not the spirit of Islam. And she did not intend to dishonor either the faith or the Prophet by allowing the kid shows the name. So to me that is an extreme example of an ignorant group of people acting the way they are. And that's absolutely unjustified. Same thing with the cartoons. The Prophet wouldn't have done that. In fact, if you go to the CARE website, there's an editorial, there's an op-ed. What would Muhammad do? And that was the response to this question, that when he was attacked, he did not go back and attack these people. He forgave them. There's a story about a woman who used to always throw garbage in his way when he was walking to the mosque. Always, every day she would come out and she knew that she would throw garbage in his way. And one day, she didn't come out. So he went to the mosque and he asked his followers, what happened to the lady? And they didn't go. So he goes back and he knocks on her door to inquire about her health, to find out if she was okay. There's another story about a man who brought entrails of some animals that they had slaughtered, right? All the blood and everything, and brought it into the mosque where the Prophet Muhammad was praying. He was in prostration, and he put it on his back. All the book and all the stuff. The Prophet did not break his prayer. He finished his prayer, his daughter came and cleaned his back, and he went on, and he forgave them. The Meccans, people in Mecca, had actually persecuted the Prophet and his followers when he began to preach Islam in Mecca, right? He was forced to migrate to Medina, to a different town. When he came back 10 years later, when there were more Muslims, when they were powerful, when he came back, the Arabs in Mecca were very afraid as to what was going to happen. And yet, he forgave them. He said, you're all part of it. And that's when many people actually accepted. So that was a way of the Prophet. That is, you can argue with people, you can differ with people, but you don't go out and kill. And certainly destroying personal property or killing innocent people in the name of defending Islam in some sense makes absolutely no sense. So unfortunately there is a lot of ignorance, and sometimes it is inflamed by our ignorant imams, mullahs, and people who really themselves don't fully understand the essence of our faith. So anyhow, the Quran forbids killing. Acts of terrorism are in response to oppression, and I'm going to give you some references to that. Especially, I know suicide bombing is an issue that comes up, and incidentally, the Quran clearly and directly forbids it. Well, I think I read one of the citations from the Quran earlier about that. And I have personally condemned it on the WABC radio, Religion on the Line program several times, with Rabbi Pertasnik and others as a part of that program, because there is no basis for justifying that. Also, the suicide bombing as a technique, as a political tool, originated in the Tamil Tigers rather than with Muslims. Now, I'm not sure that we're going to have time to go into a lot of the reference in the scriptures, but it is true that if you listen to Harvey Cox, who's the head of the divinity school in Harvard, he gave a talk at Drew once, and he talked about texts of terror. He said, if you want to find violent language You can find it in any scripture. You can go to the Quran, you can go to the Gospel, you can find it in the Old Testament, you can find it in the New Testament. It's all there, right? But what we do with it, what does it mean, is really our responsibility. So let me just skip those. Okay, keep going. Yeah, let's look at this one. In the prohibition of murder, for example, specifically, the Quran says about killing, take not life which Allah has made sacred. So here's the sanctity of life that's being emphasized, that you cannot take life, and if there are issues that you need to resolve, thus does He command you that you may learn wisdom. Use your wisdom, use your intellect. Not take life which Allah has made sacred, except for just cause. Okay? Justice is another, except for just cause. And if anyone has slayed wrongfully, we have given him their authority to demand qiyas, or qisas. But let them not exceed bounds in the matter of taking life. That even when you are allowed to defend yourself, even when you are allowed to engage in violent defense, there are rules that you have to observe. Are you in 50? Okay. And the rules are that if, this is one of those common quotes in sound bites that you hear, where people take it out of context, where they say, kill them whenever you find them, but if they turn away, seize them, and slay them. I try to actually get the full context, and if you look at the next slide, you will find that one part of a verse that was taken, verse 291, if you look at the full detail, you have to look at the verse before, chapter 2, verse 190, 191 to 194, to fully understand what the circumstances were. That's what we mean by context. The people need to understand that you can fight in the cause of Allah for those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. Allah loves not transgressors, and kill them wherever you've cast them, and turn them out of your home where they have turned you out of. This is if they've turned you out of your homes, then you can do the same to them. Okay, do not fight in the sacred mosque unless they first fight you there. But if they fight you, kill them. See, this is what one has to understand the context. If they fight you, you can do that. You can fight back. Such is the reward for those who reject faith. But if they cease, this is important, because if they cease fighting, then Allah is all-forgiving, most merciful, and fight them on until there is no more treatment or oppression. So you can do that to get rid of oppression, and there prevail justice and faith. But if they cease, let there be no hostility except to those who practice oppression. So the teaching is that if you are being attacked, yes, you can fight back. But if they cease fighting, then you have no justification to continue fighting. And in fact, the explanation that the scholars are given is that if you are in a fight and someone gives up fighting and he seeks refuge in the homes of the leader of their team, you cannot pursue that person into that house. You cannot kill children, you cannot kill old people, you cannot kill trees during the battle. Okay? So those kind of limits is what God is talking about. Let me skip I think the notion continues with the second quotation also, again, Surah Nisa, that has the full context. And there are 3 verses, 89, 90, and 91, that you have to read to fully understand the provision that is given from just 489. So when people take a piece of it, you need to really understand that there's a lot that goes before and after it. And that's why these footnotes in the translations are important, because they explain the circumstances when they came. And let me just briefly say, because it's 4 o'clock, and I really should stop here and take the questions. And that is that the Quran is pretty clear on actions that you can't take when you're being attacked. Okay? So there's no justification for you to continue after that. So for people to continue to say that the Quran advocates violence, people need to really step back and say, let me understand why. These verses of the Quran were revealed during a time when the Prophet had moved after persecution from Mecca to Medina. There was a small community living in Medina. There were Jewish tribes. There were 4 major Jewish tribes in Medina. There were Christians. There were others. A lot of pagans. And the first thing he did was to make a pact with them. He made a pact with the Jews, with the Christians, and other people living in that town. It's known as the Constitution of Medina. That was the first action of diplomacy that he undertook, which was to agree that if we get attacked, if the city of Medina gets attacked from outside, we will all defend it. It spells out all of the protection that people, who were to provide peace with, right? So he makes that but during that time, there were people from pagan groups who were attacking. Okay, they're carrying on to being attacked. So these are the revelations that came during that time. Specific those instances, they do not apply to, all the time. And that's why one needs to understand the context. I have a lot more to say, but I think I'd rather stop here and take your questions. Thank you.
Can you reaffirm the age, the original language in the authors of the Quran?
The original authors of Quran is God. Because it is not correct to say, because some people do say Muhammad wrote the Quran. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not write the Quran. He received the revelations through the angel Gabriel. He memorized it. His followers memorized it, wrote it down, and they recorded it. Okay? And it started, as I said, when he was about 40 years old, when he began to receive the revelations. And he was born in 610. Okay? And he was born in 570, grew up as an ordinary individual. His parents, his mother died soon after. His father died. His grandfather first raised him, then he took him to his uncle, he raised him. He became a merchant, and he used to work for a lady who was a very successful business person. Her name is Khadija. And when she liked what he was doing for her as a business, she proposed marriage to him. She was about 15 years older than he was. She proposed the marriage. He accepted, and they got married. And she was in fact the longest time that before she died. She actually was one of the first witnesses about the revelation that were coming in and so forth. So after they moved to Medina, revelation continued to come. There is no, as I said, the Prophet died in 632 AD. So that's roughly the history of the context of the Quran. So the Quran was revealed over a 23-year period, and it was, as I said, recorded and has been preserved that way.
In Arabic?
In Arabic, yes. Now the Quran was revealed in Arabic because that was the language of the people that it came to, and but obviously translations exist everywhere. In the prayers, we are expected to learn enough of the Quran to be able to recite it, just like the first chapter and some other parts of the Quran, and we need to be able to say that. But then, of course, we can read the translation in any language. As I said, it has been preserved. And the Quran actually itself says, God says, we will protect the Quran as it revealed. So it cannot be changed. Yes, sir.
Muhammad recognized Injil,
Could you speak
gospel.
up, please?
Oh, Muhammad recognized Injil, that is gospel.
Yes.
The word from God.
Yes.
And of course, he recognized Jesus as a special prophet.
As the Prophet of
And
God.
also, it says in Quran.
We treat him as the Prophet of Islam also.
Yeah, Jesus as the Spirit of God.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So something special about Jesus.
Yes.
And so he did miracles, lot of things special
That's right.
about Jesus. And Jesus came with a message which said, show the other cheek.
Yes.
Now, same time, prophet came a message to fight. How can you then say the God in the Injil and the God in the means Allah is same?
Okay.
And I can show you several verses from Quran which clearly says to fight not this, I agree. You
I
should
just
support
read
it.
the most two popular ones.
There are a lot of
And I
verses.
read
That is
you-
why it is going all over the world. There is something wrong there.
Let me answer that question. I think you are falling into the same fallacy that most people who want to attack Islam and want to vilify Islam, by doing that, by selecting a part of the verse and not looking at the conditions under which that verse is revealed. Now, if you recognize what I just read to you, those two long slides, I'll give you the full context. Then you would know that there was a reason, first of all, that it is defensive action. Okay? The Prophet did not say to fight. Fight only when you are getting oppressed. Okay? When they are fighting. When you get attacked, you can attack them back. Okay? That is when you are allowed to do. And then, even then, there are limits. Okay? So yes, there is a difference in terms of the teachings of Jesus and these teachings, but these teachings need to be understood in terms of when you are allowed to do that. And I think it is totally incorrect. And for you to continue to insist that these citations mean that Islam somehow has a different message or it is a different God, if it's the same God as we believe that gave us the Injil, the Quran, and the Torah, then his messages are consistent. So you need to understand the context.
No, yes. So a tree is known by its fruit.
Yes.
If somebody is from God, you recognize that person from his actions, not verses.
Yes.
From actions. And you look at what prophet, this historic prophet,
Yes.
and tell me how others cannot fight. You're supposed to follow prophet, right? What he did.
Yes.
Read in your hadith and other stuff, even in Quran. You go read Surah 929.
Yes.
What does it say? I can read to you. 929.
What does it say?
Oh, fight those who neither believe in Allah nor the last day, who do not forbid what Allah and His Messenger have forbidden, and do not embrace the religion of the truth, being among those who have been given the book, Bible and the Torah, until they pay tribute out of hand and have been humiliated.
Which translation are you reading from?
You can take any translation. Surah, it is a well-known translation. Surah, you may have a website now.
Yes, I can pull up the website, but we don't have time to get into that. But I'm going to tell you.
Well, I can tell you. I just recently read a book, and I am really convinced. I knew a lot about the customs of.
Well, can I ask you to also read?
What?
Let me ask you this.
Let me finish this. About the
Okay.
just one thing. So a book that is written by a Muslim, born Muslim in Pakistan. Her name is Gulshan Esther. Go to web and search for her. She is still living. You will get lot more about Islam, custom, or the culture and the real teaching from that book. Gulshan Esther. Search for that book.
Listen, there are a lot of people, and I know you have a point of view.
No, this is a
And
Muslim.
That's okay. You have a point of view, and there are those who have written. Again, you're taking this out of context, because if you read the rest of the Quran needs to be understood in its totality.
I can give you
When
other
the Quran
verses.
says to you clearly, there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fid din.
Yes, I have
Do you
that
understand
verse
what that means?
I have that verse
So
too.
when the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion, how can you then use some other part of the Quran out of context and say the Quran is saying to you to kill people? That is absolutely unbaseless. I could give you a lot of other citations.
No, in Quran-
I'd like to allow other people to ask questions.
Quran
Thank
there
you.
are a lot of
Yes, sir.
contradictions.
Unfortunately, in more contemporary terms, we in the Western world read about the civil fighting between the Sunni and the Shia.
Right.
And unfortunately, we sometimes get the impression part of the incentive for both Sunni and Shia to go at one another has a basis in their faith or their secular beliefs. Could you comment on that?
Sure. That is a very good question, because first of all, there is no religious basis of the difference. As I said, the political split occurred because of the fight as to who the leader of the community should be. We look at they read the same Quran, and in fact, there's a recent article in one of the magazines that has 11 different questions about Shia versus Sunni, and that talks about perceived differences and pointing out that there are really only superficial differences in how you practice certain things. But the differences have been, right now, for example, if you look at Iraq, these people lived for centuries together. They intermarried. I was on a panel with an assistant, a representative to Ayatollah Sistani, who's one of the top leaders in Iraq. He has a representative here in the U.S. He was on the panel with us, and he was asked a question about the same thing. And he said, my cousin, a Shia, is married to a Sunni. We lived in the same neighborhood, and we never ever asked even whether we were a Sunni or a Shia. It's only after the conflict that it has now become an issue of who is going to have control of the economic resources in Iraq. The issues of conflict, whether it's Iraq or it was the Ireland situation or Kashmir, is about economic resources. I think we need to be honest about understanding the circumstances that cause people to take those kind of actions. So that violence is not dictated by faith. It is, unfortunately, people use the faith as a basis for gathering support from one side or the other. But their fight is not about faith. Yes, sir. Yeah.
You already alluded to the contest among our presidential candidates about who could be tougher. We have a lot of phrases: war on terror, war on terrorists, war on terrorism, war on Islamic extremists, war on Islamic fundamentalists, and now more recently we have Islamofascists. And I'm going to ask you how you felt about all of what I just said, and how would you like the term war on international terrorists, which would remove the religious context from it?
Yeah, war on international terrorism is what we are really facing. And it is, I as a Pakistani, former Pakistani, recognize this as a threat, as the Pakistani people themselves do. That it is a war against extremism, people who are using the religion for their political ends, that we all need to fight. And in fact, I know if some of you remember, if you read the Burnsville News, that the week of 9/11, the headline in that story was, "We are all under attack." Because when Jay Carey called me about 9/11, about the attacks and so forth, that we are all under attack. Because we felt, as Muslims, as Americans, we're all under attack by these extremists and terrorists. And we need to fight them, we need to defeat them, but not fight Islam.
You'd be happy
So
if we
I would not, for example, the word Islam, absolutely. The word Islam should not be associated with fascism. There is no worse oxymoron than the word Islamofascism. They cannot, the two simply can't go together. And I know that in October people had this Islamofascism Awareness Week, because there are people who are trying to demonize the faith. But fortunately there were enough students, Muslim students, who were able to hold teach and seminars to let people understand what the truth is and so forth. So I think a lot of these folks have political goals, and they're trying to use the current hatred or current anger that people have and channel it toward the faith, which is wrong. Frankly, let's look at this. There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, right? So every fourth person, roughly, is a Muslim. Many of you will find your doctors, your engineers, your professors will be Muslims, and sometimes even elected officials. So, and if the faith was the problem, how come these problems did not surface for 1,400 years? These problems that we are seeing arose in the last 55 to 60 years because of the circumstances that have been created. Okay? We need to recognize that. Kashmir problem occurred in 1948, right? You got Israeli-Palestinian problem this time. There are all these issues. Have other conflicts and so forth. I think we need to recognize the reality of those things that are causing people to take not the faith. If it was the faith, for example, why, for example, Spain? You've heard of the period of Islam as being Spain. And during that time, the vizier, the head of government under the Muslim king was a Jew. And do you know that Maimonides, who is known as the greatest Jewish scholar, who wrote the philosophy that exists today? In fact, there are rabbis who will tell you that the philosophy that we have today would not have existed had Maimonides not written it. And what language do you think he wrote in? He wrote in Arabic. He wrote all his work in Arabic. It was then translated during that time. Because there was such a trial. In fact, there's a beautiful book, it may be in the back. It's called The World's Ornament, The Ornament of the World, written by Rosa Maria Menacom, a professor at Yale. She's a professor of languages. And she writes about how the Christians, Jews, and Muslims created a culture of tolerance in medieval Spain. So if faith was the problem, why did it happen then? I mean, if you want to find an example of extremism in the name of faith, I think you just have to go to the Inquisition and see there's a pure and simple reason why people did that. And even the Crusaders, in fact, the word holy war that we keep hearing about didn't originate in Islam. There's no word like that. There's nothing holy about war. And there is no instance in the Quran or any writing about holy and war being connected. It was basically associated with the Crusaders, with the Crusades when they started. So I think we have to sort of look at the history from that perspective. Frankly, if the faith was the issue, then why didn't we have these problems before? They were consistent. Yes?
But we read the newspapers and the magazines, and when we watch television, we read about the galleys, the Sudan.
Right.
We read about the lady who was the rape victim in
Right.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's another abomination.
And we read about Salman Rushdie and Theo Van Gogh and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Now let the given be that this is a peaceful religion, it's a wonderful religion. But what has to happen? If you have the power right now to make a real difference, to make sure that some British school teacher laboring for the good of kids in Sudan would never be humiliated the way this gal was, or the rape victim who's facing 6 months and 200 lashes, what would you do? What button would you push? With what results to get rid of this strain of violence or anger or what?
It's a very big order. It's a tall order.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I wish I had the power to do that. But I think what's needed, in fact, I have a chart in it. You go to the last chart, maybe you can find it. How to end it. How to end terrorism. Let me just use that.
He actually asked me to ask the question.
Go back. Okay. Yeah, go back. And yeah, here we go. Okay. Here's my answer. Okay? First of all, I know it doesn't directly address the book, but in general, that's the definition of it. And I'd like to sort of come back to, because there are circumstances that have caused this anger. We have time being called. So we have to end. But then you can see that these are some of the events that are really hurting us, and creating the environment that really feeds into it and gives people the tools to recruit these folks that wouldn't exist. So I would say end occupation of Iraq, solve the Palestinian problem, Palestinian-Israeli problem, there needs to be peace for both. Peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. And I hope that the Annapolis conference will lead to something. There is some hope there. We've got to resolve and base that on justice. Regain respect of the U.S. in terms of war around the world. But ultimately, my answer to the extremism that exists, like in Sudan we're seeing, or even in Pakistan, is really the pace of education to alleviate the poverty and ignorance. And we need to teach our imams. I think first thing we need to do, if I had the option And I think we should try to do that. People who are teaching in these mosques, teaching in the religious schools, are the ones who need to be taught. They need to be trained. That is the biggest source of problem and continuous spread of this ignorance. Otherwise, you wouldn't, for example, these demonstrations that we are seeing in Sudan wouldn't happen if some of the imams would stand up and say, no, this is nonsense. They are not disrespecting the Prophet. They are not disrespecting Islam. She's a teacher. They should welcome her. You know, she is there living in Sudan. She could have easily lived in England a very comfortable life. She decided to go there because I think she wanted to do good. So appreciate it and use that rather than try to demonize her. So I think that is pure, absolute pure ignorance. And the only way to get rid of that is by really, mass education of the imams, I would say, before we even talk about the monks. Because they are the ones who are causing most of it.
You talked about something that I think is very promising, which is the 138 scholars,
Yes.
Islamic scholars reaching out to the Christian religious leaders.
Yes.
And the basis for their reaching out was they quoted Jesus.
Yes.
They said, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Absolutely.
Love God with your whole heart and soul.
And the Quran says the same thing.
That's right. And they pointed out that that's
Yeah.
the kind of the Quran.
Exactly.
And
And by the way, the title of that letter, the common word between us and you, is directly from the Quran.
yeah. But I think it's unfortunate that we know so little about the progress of that. I mean, I don't know if people in this room.
It is just happening. It is really, truly just happening.
Yeah.
As I said, the message from the Pope came 2 days ago. I read about the Fiqh Council yesterday. There's a momentum that needs to be built. And I think we need to continue that and do that. And in fact, if you go to our website, one of the things we do is we do a lot of interfaith work. And we are saying we're going to take up the Pope's invitation to get the Christians and Muslims together. And by the way, also the Jewish groups. Because the president of the Reform Movement of Judaism, Rabbi Eric Yofi, came and spoke at the association at the Islamic Society of North America Convention at Labor Day weekend. And I was there, and I heard him. I was sitting in the first row. And I met him and talked to him about continuing that work. He lives in Westfield, by the way. And so he gave a beautiful message about why it was time for us as Americans, he said, to understand Islam and work with Muslims, rather than trying to demonize the faith. Because we really need, we have so much more in common than we think. In fact, there's a book by that title, More in Common Than You Think, by Bill Baker. If you haven't read it, it's a good paperback to read. Well, I think I really need to wrap up because Phyllis is giving me a run. Thank you very much.
Mom.
I don't know where I is the first time.
I don't know the guys.
So did Mama. I know her face tonight.
So I have to act in the way that brings
Don't unplug it. Next to the food.
More of these plans, and you tell Phyllis, sure, and she'll let us know when we can come. Sure.
I got it.
I got it. You got it, you got it. Okay, now screw it in. I got it.
You do? I got it. I got it. Is it screwing?
Yeah.
You
Got
feel it?
Yeah, I got it. Look, I got it. I got it.
Can you get the boxes from the car?
What box?
The box, the empty boxes, because we have to collect all this stuff.
Okay.
Are we gonna take his stuff?
Muhammad, come on.